I have not made a YouTube video in a good while. I've just been making TikTok videos recently, so this is a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I really feel like God has been leading me to start making YouTube videos again and to share my story. So for my first video back, I am going to be sharing my story. I guess I should probably start off with telling you who I am. If you don't know me, my name is Ariana, but you can call me Ari if you want to, you don't have to, but I like going by Ari because it's just easier to remember. I absolutely love Jesus, and he has helped me overcome addiction to drugs, alcohol, nicotine, and overcome depression and anxiety. He has freed me. We'll just say that. He has freed me from myself. I am going to be sharing my story with y'all today, and I have it written out, so if I'm looking at this paper for reference, that's why. So to start off, I want to give you some background on my childhood. I had a pretty great childhood growing up, to be honest, and I'm really, really grateful for that because it gave me a foundation for the rest of my life. But I am the oldest of 5, so I have a younger brother and 3 younger sisters. So as you can imagine, it was usually very busy and chaotic at home, but my mom did so much to make our lives fun and memorable. We did so many different things, and as my dad worked out of town a lot of the time to provide for us, he was still a very loving and caring dad, and he was there as much as he could be. I grew up going to church often. My mom always brought us to church. My dad worked in a church. I went to all the different vacation Bible schools, and I went to church camp a handful of times. So I was in church as a kid. But whenever I got into my early teen years in middle school and high school, I started dealing with depression and loneliness. And my family stopped going to church as much, and I started to question my belief in God. So I didn't want to tell anyone what I was dealing with because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to put more on my parents whenever they already had so much going on. So I quietly struggled with self-harm and thoughts of suicide and deep depression for the first few years of high school. So then during my junior year, when I was 16, I started to date a boy who lived next door to us that I had known as a friend since the 6th grade. And this relationship was the first of multiple codependent relationships throughout my life. But I started dating this boy, and I started hanging out with him and his friends a lot because I was so eager to make friends. I was really not good at making friends. So anytime that they were bringing alcohol or weed or anything else, I was participating. And quickly after the first time that we all drank together, it became a regular thing. They were coming over every week or so, and we were drinking or smoking weed, or occasionally we were doing LSD. During this time, I also started to believe that God didn't exist. The friends that I were around were atheists, and I thought it only made sense that I was dealing with depression because there was no God. So I stopped believing in God completely. Well, the next year, my senior year, I broke up with the boy next door and I drifted away from those friends. But shortly after graduating high school, I started hanging out with a new group of guy friends that also smoked and drank often. And I eventually started dating one of them. And him and I would go to parks or under bridges, and we would spray paint graffiti and just do stupid things. So on my 19th birthday, on my literal birthday, I suggested that we would go to an old abandoned building downtown that I knew of to spray paint. So later that night, we went to this old building and we snuck in, and as we were spray painting the walls, cops came and arrested us for trespassing and graffiti. So I spent about 4 days in the county jail, and I literally thought I ruined my life. I was distraught because I had previously enlisted in the Navy and I was supposed to go to boot camp a few months from then. So I literally thought I ruined everything. So one of the days that I was in jail, I had a phone call with my mom, and she told me to try to pray. Well, at that time, I didn't believe in God, so I thought nothing of this until later that night. I was crying. I was so overwhelmed and stressed that I just remember calling out to God and saying, God, if you're real, please help me. And that was all I said. But immediately after I said that, I stopped crying completely. Like, my tears dried up, and I felt an overwhelming, comforting peace cover me. Like, it was like a blanket covered me, and I felt like God was in the room, and I knew everything was going to be okay. So after this, after I got out of jail, I started wanting to learn about God. I wanted to start going to church because I was like, okay, God is for sure real. I need to learn about him. So I did that for a few months, and then I went to boot camp. And during boot camp, I read my Bible as much as possible. I went to church every chance I got because it was really the only thing that got me through boot camp. After boot camp, I was stationed in Japan, and I went on an aircraft carrier deployment for about 3 months, and then we came back to base for a couple months. Then I went on another deployment, but during that whole time I was in Japan, I became extremely depressed. It was a very big culture shock for me, and it was such a negative environment that I literally could not find any joy or happiness there. And drinking alcohol was a super normal thing in the military. It was everything that we would do in our free time. But I started drinking heavily to cope with the depression. And eventually I started seeing a psychiatrist who recommended for an early separation out of the Navy. So about 6 months later, after a ton of paperwork, I went home with an honorable discharge, and I really had no idea what I was going to do with my life at that point. And at that time, I was still occasionally reading my Bible. I was going to church. I believed in Jesus, but I didn't have a relationship with him, and I was still living for the things of the world. I was still just living the way that I wanted to live. So eventually I got a job, and I started hanging out with old friends from high school, and we would drink or smoke. And during the beginning of 2020, right before COVID, I started dating a guy that I was friends with in high school. And at that time, I was drinking more often than not, especially since I had just turned 21. So after only about a month of dating this guy, I found out I was pregnant. And I stopped drinking, obviously, but as I got sober, I realized that I didn't want to be in a relationship with this guy anymore. And I told him that we would have to co-parent. And I am so grateful that I decided to have my daughter because she is the biggest blessing. So after I broke up with her dad, I started to grow more in my faith, but I still didn't have a strong relationship with God. So whenever my daughter was around a year old, I met a guy on a Christian dating app. And instead of looking for love and attention from God, I thought that I could find love in a man. And I was definitely wrong about that, because this guy was not at all who he claimed to be. He was very manipulative. And I know now that it was because he was in addiction, but at the time I had no idea. He was just lying to me, and I thought I was helping him out because he said so many things to make me feel bad for him. So we started dating, and he started living with me, but at the time I still had a problem with drinking, and I didn't know until it was too late that he also had a problem with drinking and drugs. So after only about a month or so of knowing this guy and drinking with him, we got into a big argument one night while we were super drunk, and he left and came back later that night even more messed up than before, and I found out that he went and bought some kind of pills, which at the time I didn't know what kind of drug they were. But because I was super drunk and very curious, I asked if I could try some, and I ended up doing some of the drug that he was doing, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up the next morning in an emergency room because I had overdosed on fentanyl. And sadly, this was not a wake-up call for me, even though it should have been. It was actually the start of this addiction. So shortly after the overdose incident, CPS was called on me, and my daughter was ordered to go live with her dad and his mom, which I actually believe was the hand of God protecting her, because only a few weeks later, the guy that I was with went and bought the pills again, and we started using them every day. quickly after this, things went from 0 to 1,000 so fast, and he went completely off the rails, started buying all different kinds of drugs and doing them all at the same time. And he would act very dangerous and sporadic. He would throw tantrums and just cause all sorts of problems. For about 3 months, it was absolute chaos trying to get him to go to a detox or a rehab. And every time that I would bring him to a hospital, he would find out some way to get out and come back. After a few weeks, I finally managed to find him a rehab that was in a different city. So whenever he left, I tried to stop using, and I told my family that I stopped, but I didn't actually want to, and I just wanted to be numb and not have to think about all the things that I had just went through. So I continued using, and I actually started dating a guy that I met through the last guy. So I dated this guy and used fentanyl for 2 years and was addicted to this drug where it was literally controlling my life. And the whole time I was lying to my family and damaging all of the relationships with the people that I cared about. And I broke trust with a lot of people. And during this time, I also started to push away God because I felt so ashamed and guilty that I didn't think that God would want anything to do with me. So I grew very distant, but I still knew that God was always protecting me. And near the end of 2023, I actually started to feel a pull from God to try to stop using. And I actually felt like I heard him say that if I didn't get clean, that he would make it to where I had to. And it's just crazy to think now because that's actually what happened. So about 2 months later, I had to take a drug test for my daughter's dad. And whenever he sent me the results back and I saw the positive for fentanyl and traces for multiple other drugs that I didn't even realize I was ingesting, it was like reality slapped me in the face real quick. And immediately I tried to make up an excuse and explain myself by lying again, but then I realized that this is what God meant by he'd make it to where I'd have to. So the next day, I checked myself into the VA hospital in Dallas, and I detoxed for 3 days where they put me on Suboxone, which is a medication to treat opioid use. During that time that I was withdrawing and literally felt like I was dying, I started to remember everything that I learned in my childhood, everything that I learned from the years that I tried to learn about God and read my Bible, and it all just started to fit together and make sense. And I realized that life in general is literally about Jesus and finding him and finding our purpose in him. After I got out of detox, I continued to take the medication they prescribed me, and a few weeks later, I went to the 30-day rehab program at the VA, and I started to grow an actual relationship with God. And I would pray every day. I would read my Bible every day. And before I got clean, I would just call on God whenever I felt like I needed him. And I didn't actually know him personally or live my life walking with him. So after I started going to this program, I started living my life seeking God and seeking his will for my life. So after I got out of the rehab program, I went home and I was still dating this guy that I spent 2 years with. So I helped him go to detox and get clean. And only a few months later, he actually gave his life to Christ too, which was incredible to watch. But shortly after that, I felt like God was telling me to break up with him. So now I have 2 years clean from drugs. I have 4 years without drinking any alcohol. And within these last 2 years, I have grown so immensely, especially in my relationship with God and knowing what God has for my life. A couple months ago, I started feeling convicted about vaping because I've been vaping for 10 years. And vaping was something that I never really thought that I could possibly give up. But a few months ago, I started feeling convicted about it. And I literally felt like God was telling me that the life that he has for me does not include me being addicted to nicotine. So I tried to quit over and over and over. I just kept going back to it every single time. And it reminded me of the cycle of addiction with drugs, where it literally feels like you have no way to give it up on your own strength. So I continued for 3 months to pray and surrender it to God. And every day that I would try to go longer without it and I would try to surrender it to God, the conviction of it continued to grow stronger. And I literally felt like it was the worst thing that I could be doing, which I tried to talk myself out of. And I would think that I have done drugs, like nicotine vaping is nothing, it's not that bad. But the conviction that God was giving me of it literally made me feel like it was the worst thing that I could be doing, which it was. But anyway, the conviction of it continued to grow stronger, which I knew was a good sign because it was the only thing that kept me focused on giving it up. And finally, at the end of this February, I felt like God was giving me an opportunity to make a decision. And I decided to literally give it to Him every second of every day. I would turn on worship music and blast worship music in my headphones so that I couldn't think about anything else, because I had to continuously tell myself that my thoughts were not going to lead me in the right direction. So I had to override my thoughts with worship, with scripture, with prayer. And I don't even know how to explain that when you hand something over to God and you continuously hand it over to Him, He will take it in His hands and carry it for you. So a scripture that I want to share with you that helped me a lot during that first week is Proverbs 3:5. And it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." And that's literally what I had to do. I had to submit all my ways to Him, and He directed my path in the right direction. And now I have 45 plus days with no nicotine, which I never thought was a possibility. So I just want to let you know that if you think that there is something that is not possible to start or to stop in your life, I want to encourage you that I know for a fact, and I have seen over and over again, that anything is possible in the hands of Jesus. Anything is possible when you just hand it to Him and keep handing it to Him as much as you need to. Anyway, that is the summary of my story so far. It's not finished yet because God is still writing my story. I will be making YouTube videos now instead of just TikTok videos, which I'll still be making TikTok videos, but also videos on YouTube, because that's just what God is asking me to do. So if you've made it to the end of the video and you're still watching, go ahead and subscribe, because I don't know why you wouldn't be subscribed if you're still watching the video. And if you want to share it with somebody that you think might be able to relate or connect to it, then please do that as well. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you have a blessed day.